Welcome back. We've been looking at the damning Digital Vibes report. It was released by the presidency today, produced by the SIU, the Special Investigating Unit. It describes how procurement processes were flouted, the law was broken, and fraud was committed in the awarding of the 150 million rand communications contract by the Department of Health. So how do we improve procurement processes in government to eliminate corruption? Is that even possible? To discuss, we're joined by the head of Legal and Investigations at Corruption Watch, Karam Singh. Mr. Singh, thank you for being with us. Firstly, for people who don't deal with government procurement, just explain how it should work and what are the big red flags here where processes were bypassed or ignored and it all went wrong?
So, I mean, the people that drafted our constitution did have some vision, and they had, put procurement squarely in the Constitution as something which requires fair, transparent, equitable processes. This finds reflection in the law in the Public Finance Management Act and in the Municipal Finance Management Act. So, there are very particular rules that need to be followed, and, it needs to be a transparent and equitable system. What we've found over the years, going back to even to the arms deal, is that procurement has been flouted, that it has been a major corruption vulnerability in the system. And whether we're dealing with municipalities or state-owned enterprises, as we've heard extensively at the Zondo Commission, or basic frontline government departments offering services like health and education, we see procurement irregularities happening annually. This is the subject of Auditor General reports, where we see reporting on fruitless and wasteful expenditure. In this case, we saw a whole gamut of procurement fraud, from fronting, the people, the actual beneficial owners of Digital Vibes were cloaked. We didn't know who they were, from interference in the procurement process to unauthorized deviations from the original contracts. To a kind of misalignment between the actual procurement and policy directives which had come from cabinet around how NHI should roll out. So, if you read the SIU report, you basically can see it almost as a case study in how the system can be corrupted and how procurement fraud can function at the highest levels.
Yeah. And the writers of the Constitution and the law, look, I think there's something that's hard to deal with when you have the minister putting pressure on people below him and then saying, look, I wasn't involved in the actual awarding of the contract. In this case, like we were discussing earlier, there's a WhatsApp, but often that can be verbal. Is that very hard to deal with?
Absolutely. This is now a form of cronyism. This is abuse of power. In this case, the SIU have been able to uncover a bit of a smoking gun in terms of the WhatsApp. But we know, from just by looking at the reports from the Auditor General, that these types of procurement irregularities are happening all the time across the public sector. And, we can have the best rules in place, but ultimately there are officials in the system who've got to follow those rules, and there's got to be consequences when they don't follow them. And what we saw with the PPE scandal and with this scandal is that up the chain of command, from the political accountability down to the DG, down to the chief financial officers, there were people who knew about this and that ultimately either through their malfeasance or nonfeasance are culpable in the fraud that was perpetrated on the South African public.
Yeah, and these are people that are well versed in procurement processes, in financial laws in South Africa.
This was planned. This was planned prior to the pandemic even emerging. This was something which came out of a communications budget for NHI. It was against the cabinet directive. And then they used the opportunity of COVID to then expand it further. And, effectively, these were services which should have been provided by GCIS. It's not clear what Digital Vibes provided at all. And before you know it, you see huge sums of money transferred into accounts. And then dissipated into other accounts, which is money laundering. These are very, very serious criminal offences.
There have been various solutions posed over the years. I remember the Minister Gordhan talking about the benefits of a central database of service providers who have gone through proper due diligence. If they mess up in one tender, they don't get more tenders across various governmental spheres. Could something like that have stopped digital vibes?
This is something that we're beginning to look into a bit more. There is the PFMA does provide for the blacklisting of service providers who for whatever reason have been deemed to have contravened rules. It's part of the SIU recommendations in this report that Digital Vibes gets put onto the blacklist. But what we find is that companies that are implicated aren't, for whatever reason, put on that blacklist. So, the rules are in place. There is a central supplier database. There is basic due diligence that departments must do when they put goods and services out to tender, but we find that the rules are not followed. So, in many cases, the rules are in place. I mean, there is a public procurement bill which is going through the motions. It was out for public comment last year already, and we've been trying to put some pressure on Treasury to say, why is this process so slow? We know that procurement is this huge corruption risk area, and yet there doesn't seem to be any real impetus to kind of push through legislation that would address some of the challenges that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But I think,
just
the
quickly,
general
though, is there another danger, just very quickly, because you can say, okay, we only do business, government only does business with people who have a track record, who have proved themselves. But on the other hand, then you have new companies with no track record. They may be smaller businesses that we ostensibly want to help. So you also want to give them the opportunities, right?
Absolutely, and we can't just look at procurement reform through the lens of anti-corruption. The procurement is really, a mechanism by which we can push issues like Black economic empowerment and transformation. So it's important that we do provide those opportunities to small, medium scale and local businesses. But, the diligence around, whether they filed their reports properly, who are the beneficial owners of these companies, still needs to be done in order to ensure that that people, the new entrants aren't just front companies like we saw in the case of Digital Vibes.
All right, thank you very much. Head of Legal and Investigations at Corruption Watch, Karam Singh.